Okay, I see the live light starting up here, so let's get started. Good. Welcome, everybody, and we're really pleased to have you joining us here today, and excited about an announcement that we had a couple of weeks ago with the Blue Planet division from Ciena about a new architecture and capability for our Blue Planet solution. And last week we had a webinar that was attended by like hundreds of people, and we had a great conversation and had a ton of questions that came up. So we wanted to get together with this group and do a little bit more of a deep dive and just make it very casual and have a good conversation around about Blue Planet and the solution and hear a little bit from the folks that actually built this. So we're really excited to have a few people here. I'm going to introduce. I'm Chip Rodgers with Ciena, and I want to introduce Joe Cumello. Joe Cumello is VP of Marketing. Welcome, Joe, and thanks for joining us with the Blue Planet division. Also want to introduce Nirav Modi, who is VP of our product team around Blue Planet, and he's the sort of the brainchild of the solution and works with customers to understand requirements and really put shape to the products. And then Scott Pradels. Scott is VP of Engineering, so he and his team actually built the Blue Planet, and it's great to hear from to be able to hear from Scott as well. You know, we're coming to you kind of from around the U.S. here. We're on this Hangout, and so I'm actually here in Hanover. This is my home office. I thought I might say, but actually not. It's I'm here in Hanover with some of the lab behind me, and Joe and Scott are in our Petaluma office out in California. Welcome from Petaluma, and then Nirav is in Chicago and coming to us from Chicago. So. You know, with that, I think let's jump in, and Joe, maybe why don't you start us off here and talk a little bit about the announcement last week and the reception we've gotten both from the customer and the industry. I think it's been phenomenal. So take it away.
Great. Thanks, Chip. Appreciate it, and glad to be chatting with everyone here today. Blue Planet, as most may know at this point, is a service orchestration platform, and we're really happy. Previously. As Ciena, and now very happy to be part of the Ciena team. It's been a great ride, a great 90 days since the deal closed. And one of the main things we did coming right out of the chute was to announce the shift in the architecture of the platform. So you know, if I was going to characterize the architectural shift in the platform and what we did, is really based over the last year. A lot of work went into it based on feedback from customers. And that feedback was really focused on programmability and the ability to shift and change the platform themselves, to open up the hood of it and be able to touch it and make it work in the way that they need to on a day-to-day basis. So if you look at some of the things that we announced last week or the week before, first of all, we instituted a Docker container-based microservice architecture, and there's a number of advantages to that, which some of my friends on this Hangout will go through in a little more detail. We announced Tosca-based Tosca templating for self-service programmability, which is really a critical piece for our customers. They want to be able to program the system themselves versus, you know, spending reams and reams and reams of money on software professional services, as an example, from some of the incumbent vendors. So the ability to use DevOps style programmability was really important to folks. We instituted something called BPMN, which is a business process modeling technology for better and more model-based connection to the OSS or the back office. And I think a really important thing that's been happening is customers want control of whole domains now. They need end-to-end service orchestration now, and not just the ability to control a BNF or the ability to control a piece of hardware, but actually the ability to control whole domains when you're stitching a service together. And that's really exciting, and that's another capability in the system that we talked about as part of the announcement. So, those are some of the highlights from what we did. We were excited about how that all went off last couple weeks. We got a lot of positive coverage and a lot of great feedback from customers, and now we're just sort of starting to answer questions that folks have and highlight some of the differentiation in the platform so that folks can try and understand it a little bit better.
Sorry about that. I have myself on mute. So, Joe, maybe you can talk. I think one of the questions that came up would be relevant. Maybe you can talk about some of the. There were questions on the webinar about, operating expenses and why does Blue Planet help companies reduce operating expenses. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the great things about Blue Planet, we're lucky to have already been selected in a number of spots around the world, and one of the things that happens when you end up being deployed is that you get learnings from customers, which is very exciting. And so a couple of learnings, on the SDN front, one of the major cost benefits that come out of an SDN system really are around WAN automation. So the ability to automate the whole process from end to end of delivering a service. So we've had one customer come to us and say they've gotten a 50% reduction in operating costs, and that's largely because they don't have to configure and touch every device that's part of the process of setting up a service manually. And then because it's a templated-based approach, they apply, let's say if it's in a layer 2 or an Ethernet service, they apply the MEF service template to that network service, and then it's automatically configured. The service is automatically configured and A to Z configured from end to end and up and running. So that the amount of manual time taken out of the process there obviously leads to quite a bit of operational benefit and lower costs. So that's on the that's really on the SDN front. The same thing holds true on the virtualization front and network virtualization, network functions virtualization. Obviously, we're taking processes that are incredibly manual and hardware-based and turning them into software functions that are automated and programmed instead. And I think we can all sort of lead to or get an understanding of why that has value. So yeah, it's kind of an exciting time for the whole industry and taking advantage of those cost benefits.
That's great. Yeah, it's certainly the buzz these days, and I think it's it's been something that the industry's been talking about for probably a couple of years, but now it's really it's really becoming reality. So that's very cool.
Well, the only thing I'd add on top of that is, I know a lot of questions come up around lower operational costs, but the thing that's really driving the many engagements we're currently prospects and customers that we're in today. Really is around revenue creation, to be candid, right? So everyone knows they're going to get some kind of OpEx benefit. I think we all understand where that comes from as an industry. But if you look at use cases that are really interesting right now, like virtual CPE, the actual instantiation of a managed router service or a managed security service through a virtual CPE, a lot of our network operator customers are looking at that as a way to get to revenue very quick. To not only just change the cost model, but actually to expand into new markets with virtualized managed router services as an example. So, you got both sides of the coin. It's a, like I said, exciting time to sort of figure all this out. But near-term use cases are really around driving revenue, and long-term, obviously as these companies shift and transform the way they do business, they're going to get more and more cost out of the network based on these technologies. And I think as a whole, that's really exciting for all of us.
Yeah, greater revenue, lower costs. What more?
Right. Network operator nirvana. Here we come.
So, Nirav, and actually before we jump in, I wanted to remind everybody that we're going through some of the questions that came up from last week's webinar, but if you have some questions that are coming out now you want to ask, you can just tweet your question and use the Ciena Live hashtag. And we'll take a look at it and try and answer it as well. So, Nirav, let's maybe just take a minute. If you could talk a little bit about, because you're working with customers all the time, you're hearing what they're looking for, and maybe you could talk about the impact on customers and what we did from a design and architecture standpoint. That talk about containerization and templates and how that can really help customers, perform.
Sure, Chip. So, I think it's really interesting how the industry has evolved over the last couple of years. If we go back to the original movement around SDN, it was very much focused on the networking layer, the physical infrastructure, and making the physical infrastructure much simpler. And the push there was to make the data plane much simpler and move the complexity into software, giving the network more programmability while also driving cost out of the custom vertically integrated hardware solutions that were in the network, right? And then kind of right on the heels of that came NFV, which was like, well, not only do we want to drive costs out of the forwarding plane by separating control and forwarding and enabling programmability, we actually want to move to generic off-the-shelf hardware. So the last couple of years have been very much focused on disaggregation of the hardware. That's really the simplest way to describe it. And whether that's in the form of SDN or NFV is both of those. SDN was really around disaggregation of the hardware, and then NFV kind of took it one step further. But what's happened is now everybody's looking at software-centric solutions, and operators have kind of learned how they got to where they did to kind of push SDN along, and now they're looking at all the software solutions that are coming to market and saying, wait a minute, I don't want to go from what was a vertically integrated hardware solution to now a monolithic software portfolio where now my lock-in has just moved from the hardware plane to a software plane, right? So operators are very much demanding software solutions that are also open and modular. And so over the last 18 months, it's been very obvious that operators have made a very heavy push for open source based solutions, extensible solutions, programmable solutions. They don't want monolithic solutions that require long-term service contracts with kind of the traditional players in the OSS space, right? So these messages, you don't have to look too hard to find that the industry is coalescing around this theme and this set of messages. And so, when we thought about how we were going to evolve Blue Planet, it was very obvious to us, based on our existing customers and our new engagements, that really disaggregating the software was fundamental to our next generation architecture. And that's where things like containerization play a huge role. And Scott is going to talk a lot more about how we do that. But in the context of a product perspective, what we've done is really built a platform that allows us to extend it with applications and services using containers, but it also allows operators to extend it in the ways that they feel is appropriate for them, not only from a programmability perspective through data-driven templates and southbound interfaces towards the network, but also if they want to add a new service of their own that they want to use a different software technology for, they can do that and integrate that into our platform. So what we're really providing is a very extensible architecture and an environment that allows operators to really own the solution rather than to buy something that's shrink-wrapped that then they have to pay over and over again when they want to change, right? And it's very clear that's the way the industry was headed. So, to kind of recap here, Chip, I think the goal for us with the next generation architecture was to help to listen to operators, listen to their call for disaggregation across the entire stack of software and respond to that. And that's really what we've done with Blue Planet.
Well, that's cool. And I think, AT&T announced recently that they're moving everything to that model. Containerization, DevOps. BT, I think, just a couple weeks ago had a similar announcement, and so it seems like a lot of the operators are thinking the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, there have been some operators that have been more vocal than others in the specific technologies that they want to use. For example, containerization. But across all the engagements I've been in, not a single operator has told me that, oh, I want to be locked into you, so I have to come back to you every time I want to change. Right? That's not what operators say. What they want is the ability to extend their software because their use cases are going to evolve. As Joe said earlier, they want to think about how they can generate new revenue, and they want the software to enable them to do that not to be locked in by what the software can do on its own, right? So it's really about giving them the tools they need to think about new services and actually realize those new service types, and that could span traditional networking domains as well as virtual domains. And from our perspective, the other part of Blue Planet is not to be narrow in our scope, such that we're only focused on network or only focused on a kind of a virtualization. Because if you look at the way these technologies are evolving, the line between where the network ends and the cloud begins is getting very, very blurry and gray. And it's very obvious to us that the next generation of services that operators are going to monetize are going to require coordination of both networking and cloud resources. And so if you consider that managed router use case that Joe was talking about earlier, the customer is going to have, an enterprise customer would have a VPN back to a cloud, and within that cloud there'd be a managed router that would be running as a VNF. Well, now, is that an SDN use case, or is that an NFV use case, or is it really a networking use case from a technology perspective? And for us, it's absolutely a unified use case, and we treat it as such with Blue Planet, right? And it's about having expertise not only in the WAN, which we've got a long pedigree behind us on, but also to be leaders in the context of enabling virtualization and stitching those together.
Yeah.
That's great. It's good. It's yeah, that's interesting stuff, and I appreciate that, Nirav. And Scott, we'll come back. I think we'll talk to everybody again. But Scott, I'd like to hear from you a little bit about microservices architecture and the structure of what it took to put it all together, and maybe some of the challenges that the team had in pulling this together.
Yeah, sure. So I think the challenge we recognize is that the scope and scale of the network applications that we develop today no longer fit well with the traditional monolithic software application development approach. The move within Blue Planet was to move to a microservices architecture where each component of the solution ends up being a small component that does one thing well, and we've utilized Docker and Docker containers to contain each one of those functions within the platform. From a development standpoint, that gives developers the chance to go focus on solving one problem and doing that well. From a customer standpoint, that allows us to compose solutions from these different containers and in some cases customize the functionality that's required by a particular end user. So in some cases, like a customer may have some existing intellectual property, maybe in the area of like path computation, and we'd be able to pull that component out of the solution, use the APIs that are core to microservices architecture. All the microservices communicate through lightweight APIs, which enables programmability and the ability to customize any solution. In addition to the microservices approach, the other key to Blue Planet was allowing data-driven programmability of the solution. So allowing rapid onboarding of new functions, features, workflows, so that the customers don't have to wait for a 6-month integration cycle to enable new capabilities on top of the platform.
Yeah, those are pretty pretty big deals, right? I mean, when you think about one of the large number of comments we were getting on our side after we launched about a couple weeks ago on this technology was some positive thoughts on, well, so we're going to be able to program, the Tosca templating and the ability to program the system ourselves. I was in a particular customer or prospect engagement in Europe where the customer was really liked the concept of being able to use their DevOps teams to actually do a lot of this work themselves using the Tosca templating. So that seemed to resonate really well. The other piece, as Scott mentioned, I think we should definitely draw a light on and put a light on is in a containerized architecture, you disaggregate the software stack, right? So, or you abstract the software stack. So now, like he said, if someone has a different path compute rules they want to operate by versus ours, ours might be shortest path. and someone else might have regulatory requirements they need to pay attention to, and they plug their own PCE in. That level of modularity is really unique, and we're happy to have jumped on that early. And Scott, I know the team's been working on it for a while. It's we believe a bit of a competitive advantage to actually have it done versus in conceptualization, as an example.
Yeah, the microservice architecture has also given us advantages in leveraging open source projects. So open source projects can quickly be added, removed from different solutions that we put together on top of the platform.
And I think in the announcement, we talked about, a lot of buzzwords: Docker, Tosca, Netcon, Yang, and a number of things. I think they were like that didn't even touch the all the different open source areas that we're connected into. So Scott, do you want to maybe talk a little bit more, give a little more flavor to that?
Yeah. So in terms of NetConf and Yang, the platform currently supports both. We see them being used in different domains. I think Nirav can probably give some more details on how we see those moving forward.
Sure, Scott. So I think that for us, it's really about leveraging the best technology for a given problem that we're trying to solve. We're not specifically married to a given protocol or a given technology, because the world is not homogeneous, and carrier networks are very much heterogeneous in nature, right? So we've looked at kind of what the industry is doing as far as NetConf and Yang, and as well as Tosca and CLI and such, and all of those exist today in their various roles and for different reasons. And so the way we've really set up Blue Planet is the networking layer is very much driven from a model perspective by Yang, because that's where the industry is moving. That's what operators are asking for, and our job is to build products that operators can leverage. And so there's a lot of momentum behind Yang for describing services and networking services. So Yang is a core part of that for us. What we found, though, is when you think about composing a service that spans multiple technologies like cloud and network, and then there are dependencies and ordering and sequencing that needs to be described as part of the service composition, Tosca is much better suited for that kind of use case. And so within Blue Planet, we use Tosca as our highest order service descriptor, which also captures dependencies and sequencing. For example, you need to create the VMs before you can load a VNF onto that VM, before you can configure that VNF. That kind of configuration dependency can be described very nicely in Tosca, and then the specific attributes of the service can be described in Yang. So we consider these to be very complementary, and we will continue to evolve as new technologies are available for us to consume.
Who knew we were going to get into this level of configuration and prioritization and things like that? So Nirav, thank you. That's great. Hey, question, and I'm not sure who this is for. Maybe Nirav, it's for you. Talk a little bit. A couple of questions from the webinar were about. Look, I've got a network in place today, and it's I have a lot of legacy technology, and how do I does Blue Planet work with that, or do you need to sort of start with the greenfield network, or tell me about how that what's the reality of deploying Blue Planet in a current environment?
Yeah, so I'll start, and I think Joe can add some color as well based on our engagement. So certainly, if Blue Planet is targeted to work in real networks, and real networks are not greenfield. So real networks are brownfield, and so by definition, our solution is designed to help operators take advantage of what's already in the field. So the way we do that is through adaptation to the variety of different network elements that are in the network, or controllers that are in the network. So we do that two different ways. Either we can talk to a network controller, which could be the third party's NMS or EMS, or we can directly interface with the network element itself for an automation type use case. And this goes back to our earlier topic on netconf and Yang. There's a lot of equipment in deployed equipment today, valuable deployed assets that are not supporting netconf or Yang as a modeling technique and netconf as a protocol. And so for those, we can use native syntax like CLI or TL1 or SNMP to interface with those devices. So, I mean, being deployed in heterogeneous environments is core to what Blue Planet is designed to do and what we're building it for. So brownfield is very much we target brownfield as much as new deployments. Joe,
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any color you want to add here.
Yeah, I think you know, at the end of the day, the real issue that needs to be solved by these systems is automating the service delivery process, because that's how customers, network operators make their revenue, or how they make their money. So there's two issues on the table here. The first is, how do I speed up that time to service so that instead of it taking 90 or 120 days, it only takes minutes or hours or days, let's say, versus months, number one. And how do I create services more quickly? How can I program this myself so that I can create services quickly? And all of that work and doing all of that is in a brownfield environment. All of that all those shifts and all those transformations that need to take place have to happen on the existing network. There's not a new infrastructure that's going to magically appear and solve all these problems, right? If only that were the case, right? We'd snap and it would happen. But that's not the case. So when you talk about a system like Blue Planet, it has to be architected to solve those service creation, service deployment, service automation issues. And so we're talking about Tosca and Docker containers and programmability and all these sort of architectural elements. You know, at the end of the day, you have to understand the customer's use case. The customer's use case is speeding up time to service, creating services quickly, and really getting to revenue faster, or creating new services off of virtualized technologies that they couldn't offer before. Competing with the over-the-top guys, as an example, as a way to monetize their infrastructure better. So that happens on top of the brownfield network. So a system like this has to be built that way.
Cool. That's great. You know, because I think customers expect that, right? You can't just, you know, think that you're going to replace a bunch of stuff and do that kind of, you know, capital expenditure. So that's very cool. Thank you, guys. You know, we originally thought we'd go for 30 minutes, but great conversation and a lot of good questions. So let's just hang on, keep going here. And I understand from our team that we've got a lot of viewers out there, and it keeps people are still joining. So let's keep going. Question, I think, maybe for Scott. Could you talk a little bit about the API architecture and approach, and what that you know, how that brings value to customers?
Sure. So particularly in the microservice architecture, every component of the solution that we build is the core of it is API. So as we put together or compose our solutions, what we're doing is connecting APIs between the various components, and then the UIs themselves are all API driven. So any function that you could access through a user interface on the platform is also going to be available through APIs. Also, as we recompose the solutions, each of those APIs is available, so we can adapt to each particular use case and really cover any application using the APIs just like you would a traditional UI. So it's core to the platform.
Yeah. So, and the APIs are, I mean, we're using the APIs ourselves, but then customers and partners and other you know, vendors can use the same APIs, right?
Exactly. They're fully programmable. The REST APIs today, they're fully documented using an open source technology called Swagger. So it's a standard format. It's easily consumed by third parties today. So.
Cool. Nirav, were you going to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think, Scott, it'd be worthwhile talking about how our APIs themselves are data-driven. So, you know, for example, if a customer defines a new service on their own, then that is automatically available through REST as well, right? Can you maybe just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So through the templating and the programmability programmability we talked about earlier. As you onboard a new service type, the attributes of that service, any particular set of service, are also exposed through the REST APIs and updated automatically. So that programmability ties back both to the templating and then the APIs that are available thereafter on the platform.
Yeah, and that's really, I mean, and so Chip, I think that that's really, really an important point, because a lot of times, systems will expose APIs, and those APIs are documented, and that's what they do. Mm-hmm. And you may be able to tweak things here and there around the fringes of the system, but you're fundamentally tied to only the APIs that the product is exposing. And in our case, we've made our platform so extensible and so data-driven that if I define a new service type, and I'll give you a very specific example. Let's go back to that layer 2 service that Joe was talking about earlier. If I'm a customer that wants to define, for example, a gold, silver, and bronze Ethernet private line type service, and those 3 tiers mean that they're getting, at the premium tier you have OAM, and at the middle tier you have no CIR. Maybe you only have a flexible bandwidth. You don't really have a committed rate at all, or you have a very low committed rate, or what have you. If the customer decides to change any one of those service definitions, which they can on their own with our architecture, the APIs that they would use to provision that service are changed at the same time automatically, right? So it's the whole platform is designed to be extensible and data-driven. It's not just limited to some small subset of functionality, right? And then on top of that, to complete that circle of extensibility, the UI itself is data-driven. So if I create a new service type where on my premium service I want to be able to specify OAM parameters, which are not available at my bronze and silver level, then I can actually dynamically modify my user interface screens as an operator and customize that user interface on my own without ever having to come back to Ciena, for example. Of course, we're happy to help our customers do whatever they need to do, but the point is to really give them the tools to do it on their own. And of course, we're here to make sure our customers succeed, and we will always do that. But for the customers that have the teams to do this on their own, we're giving them everything they need from a platform perspective.
So Nirav, does that come back to the template discussion we were talking earlier? Is that the idea that you sort of have these templates that can be used, and then you can make modifications within those or customize? Is that the idea?
Precisely, right. So there's really the way to think about it. There's really 3 tiers. There is the user interface, which is customizable. There is a service definition, which is customizable, and then there is the actual interaction with the network. So I could define a layer 2 service model that has my 2 endpoints and my standard MEF parameters like CIR and EIR and burst size and such, and VLAN IDs. But then there is the actual translation or mediation of that information to the network itself, and that is also customizable. So if a customer wants to change a service or add a new parameter, they can program that change into the system all the way from the network interface all the way up through the user interface, top to bottom. Cool.
This is great, and we're hitting on a lot of the questions that came up last week. So let's keep going. I'm going to take it in a little bit different direction. And Joe, one of the questions that came up last week was, could you talk about some of the service providers that are sort of more aggressive in terms of rolling out SDN and NFV capabilities?
Sure. So I think legally I should first say that by mentioning these folks, we're not in any way implying that we are involved in the projects. But from an industry standpoint, I think we can probably clearly denote who the key players are, who are really sort of the first movers in analyzing this technology and bringing it to market. We have publicly announced our involvement with Colt and CenturyLink, so those are 2 publicly announced engagements for Ciena that I think those are 2 very progressive companies that are looking at these technologies and how it transforms their business. And so proud to be part of those projects. You also have your very public announcements and very public movements by companies like AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, Telefonica. Those are some of the big names that come to mind that have very vocal public personas about the movements that they're making out in the market and the shifts that they want to make as companies in heading this direction. So I think there are many more than that, obviously, but we're happy to be engaged in many opportunities around the world as part of a leader in this space. But there are certainly a core group of first movers that are making a lot of noise, and those guys are part of it.
Okay, cool. So while we're sort of talking about the market and the direction that the market's going, kind of related question. Can you talk a little bit about Blue Orbit and the partners that we're working with and sort of how we're helping pull them together?
Yeah. Blue Orbit is our SDN and NFV partner ecosystem. There are many companies in it. I'm not going to name, for the sake of time, I'm not going to name them, obviously. But that ecosystem is completely driven by customer engagement. So almost all, I can't say all, but almost all have been brought to the ecosystem based on either a POC, a trial, or live deployment with the customer, and as a result, we've had to integrate those partners into working with Blue Planet in some way, shape, or form. And that ecosystem contains hardware companies that where we might be from an SDN control standpoint managing the hardware device for a network service, as an example. They could be data center / NFV or telco cloud infrastructure providers. Whether it's for instance Intel and VMware are part of the ecosystem. So there's certainly the infrastructure, the NFV infrastructure folks, and the cloud data center infrastructure, and then of course you've got VNF partners that are part of our ecosystem as well. We've Fortinet and SerDes and Brocade are also part of that. So it really depends on, these folks are brought together as part of a best-in-breed solution that we're trying to bring to market with customers, but it's almost always driven by some kind of customer engagement. And we will be adding more and more partners over time into the ecosystem on the very back of the fact that we continue to get more and more engagement with customers. Those customers, because their engagements are based on their infrastructure is different from their competitors. We will keep onboarding new technologies and new partners based on those different types of networks and the technologies within them.
So one of the questions actually that came up related to that again last week was, what's in it for those other vendors and partners that are part of, why would they want to join the Blue Orbit ecosystem?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because for me, I feel like the answer is obvious. Each of these folks have their own domain and areas of expertise, right? Not only that, but they were selected by the customer for the use case that we're involved with them in, right? So, I think the genesis of that question is Ciena is a company with a lot of different technologies that they serve, hardware and software. And so the question comes up, hey, if I have a piece of network hardware device that's in your Blue Orbit ecosystem, is somehow that going to get supplanted by Ciena technology, let's say? Well, the fact of the matter is that partner's hardware is in Blue Orbit because the customer chose it, because the customer wanted it. And we're an open ecosystem and an open software platform that needs to be multi-vendor for this whole thing to work. And I think that's the key, the key point that we try and drive every time with our customers and partners and future partners. Is that the customer drives the opportunity, and we're going to engage with everyone to make that service, because at the end of the day, it's about a service. It's about the customer driving a service from end to end to make sure that works.
Cool. All right. Great. Well, and let's see. Again, so let's take it into another little bit different direction. Thank you, Joe. And I think this is maybe a question for you, Nirav, about one of the questions that came up was, again, in this sort of, ecosystem of multi-vendor networks, Can you talk a little bit about security and how we address that with Blue Planet?
Yeah, sure, Chip. So I think the question of security on virtualization tends to come up quite often, and what we have typically found in our conversations with operators is that security in virtualized environments is not a new problem. They've been working and solving this in traditional cloud environments for a number of years, right? The public cloud or even private cloud. And so I think the advantage we have with NFV is that we can take advantage of all of those technologies and solutions that are available today. We're not inventing the cloud as part of virtualization, right? We're just finding ways to leverage that technology for what we can do with it in the traditional carrier networking space. So to me, it's even going to be better than what it is like today, because you have the benefits of all of this work of these traditionally very high-scale, inherently multi-tenant environments that we're trying to put our devices into in the context of VNFs. So for me, it's awesome, because we're going to be able to take advantage of all of those existing technologies and hard work that the traditional cloud guys have already figured out, right? We're not going to reinvent those wheels.
Yeah. Kind of related question, and Nirav or Scott, maybe you want to chime in here, but one of the questions was, again, complex network, multi-vendor, and we're sort of have the software layer. Talk a little bit about, troubleshooting when problems come up. How does is it now sort of more complex and a harder challenge to solve, or does Blue Planet help isolate the problem, and does it help or hurt?
Yeah, I think Blue Planet can help in that domain because we have visibility of the whole end-to-end service. We're not partitioned into multiple vendors' EMS systems any longer, where you have to move from system to system to really see the end-to-end service. Blue Planet allows you to pull that end-to-end service that the customer is really trying to deliver up into a single platform, see the performance management information, view the alarms across a multi-vendor environment, rather than having to jump to multiple systems to really establish the end-to-end view of the service. So I think it provides some big advantages in terms of troubleshooting and doing service assurance on a typical network application.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where the question was headed. So that's great. Thanks, Scott. A couple of questions. I think maybe this might be for Joe. Is sort of the future and where. With Ciena and Ciena, now Blue Planet coming together. Talk a little bit about One Control and some of the Ciena technology, and how are those coming together?
Yeah, so I think we were very public in our statements when the deal was announced as a company to the public markets that with the acquisition by Ciena of Ciena, that Blue Planet was going to be the future platform for the portfolio, whether it's in the network virtualization space or in what we call the SDN control management and control space over the hardware, as an example. But to be clear, One Control is going to be a critical and important and long-term part of how Ciena platforms are managed, and over time. Blue Planet will eventually start taking on some of those roles as Ciena equipment is onboarded into it. So I think long and short of it is Blue Planet is the critical piece of the company's software strategy going forward. We're proud of that as a company, whether it's in the service orchestration or the network virtualization space or the SDN management and control space. It'll take us some time to integrate some of those things together. But it's a great opportunity for us and a great opportunity for customers, and we're looking forward to seeing how that turns out in the future.
Good. Well, that may be a good closing statement, or a good way to wrap things up. I think I've actually gone through all the questions that I had pulled out from the session last week. So, guys, thank you for joining today, and And this has been great. I've learned some things. Some of the things went right over my head, but especially when Nirav was talking. But I'm sure they hit the mark with a lot of people. So everybody watching. So one thing that I'll say is, look, we're first of all, thank you guys for joining. Anybody that was watching, thanks for joining. We are going to post this. This will be posted as a video in our in the Ciena YouTube channel. So if you want to take a look, back again, or if you came midstream, you want to hear the beginning, or want to share this with some colleagues, then take a look for that shortly. We'll have it up on our YouTube channel. So, look, thank you guys for joining. Joe, Nirav, and Scott, great discussion and great answers to some interesting questions, and I guess with that, I'll say I'm Chip Rodgers, and thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you.
Thanks.
Thanks.